Picture this. The sun is a merciless, white-hot coin in a bleached blue sky. You are standing on a hastily constructed wooden platform. The jeers and murmurs of a fearful crowd, a distant buzz in your ears. The air is thick with dust and the bitter scent of injustice. A coarse, heavy rope rests against the delicate skin of your neck, a grotesque necklace promising a final, brutal deliverance. They call you Sister Agnes, a woman of God, a pillar of this forgotten, sun-scorched town. But they also call you a thief, a poisoner, a liar, and in seconds they will call you dead. Your eyes, wide and unblinking, are not fixed on the leering face of the mayor who condemned you, nor on the grim executioner preparing to send you into eternity. They are fixed on the horizon, on the shimmering heat haze that dances over the endless desert road. You are praying not for a miracle from heaven, but for one to ride in on horseback. You are praying for a past you thought you had buried to rise up and save you. And just as the executioner's hand tightens on the lever, a silhouette appears, a lone rider moving not with haste, but with the slow, deliberate certainty of fate itself. 6 months earlier, that same unforgiving sun had watched Sister Agnes guide her rickety wagon, its wheels groaning under the weight of flour and beans for her small orphanage. The town of Redemption's Gulch was a harsh place, a crucible that either forged souls into steel or broke them into dust. Agnes, with her serene smile and hands that were never idle, seemed forged of the finest steel. She had arrived 2 years prior, a quiet woman in a simple gray habit, and had single-handedly built a sanctuary for the town's forgotten children on a plot of land no one else wanted. But her serenity was a carefully constructed dam holding back a lifetime of sorrow. As the sky began to curdle, turning from a placid blue to a bruised purple, she felt an old, familiar anxiety prickle at her skin. The storm broke with biblical fury, the rain falling not in drops but in solid, wind-whipped sheets. The world dissolved into a roaring chaos of water and sound. A sharp crack echoed beneath her as the wagon's axle snapped, sending the cart lurching violently into a ditch. Thrown clear, Agnes landed hard, her head striking a rock. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was the churning, wrathful sky. She awoke to the soft crackle of a fire and the scent of pine and stew. A rough but clean blanket was tucked around her, and her head rested on a pillow that felt suspiciously like a folded saddlebag. Her eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the dim, warm light of a small, one-room cabin. A man sat at a simple wooden table, his back to her, meticulously cleaning a rifle. He was large, broad-shouldered, and moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a life where no energy was ever wasted. When he finally turned, she saw his face. It was a landscape of harsh experience, tanned by the sun, with a jaw set in a permanent line of grim resolve. A thin, white scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his lip, pulling it into a perpetual, slight sneer that his sorrowful eyes belied. "You were lucky," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, like stones shifting deep underground. "The storm would have stripped the flesh from your bones by morning." Agnes struggled to sit up, a wave of dizziness washing over her. Where am I?" Her voice was a hoarse whisper. "My name is Elias Thorne," he stated, offering no more. "You are safe here. Your wagon is splintered. The supplies are lost." He spoke in short, declarative sentences, as if emotion were a luxury he could not afford. For 3 days, Agnes recovered in the stoic silence of his cabin, a small island of order in the vast, untamed wilderness. She learned more about him from his silence than from his words. She saw the way his eyes would linger on the fire, a profound sadness swimming in their depths. She noticed he had no pictures, no keepsakes, save for a small, worn leather-bound book he kept on the mantelpiece but never opened. He was a man hollowed out by loss, a ghost haunting the shell of his own life. She, in turn, tried to fill the silence with her own quiet faith. "The Lord provides, even in the desert," she told him one evening, gesturing with a grateful nod to the broth he had made her. Elias looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The desert takes, sister, takes everything sooner or later. The Lord has nothing to do with it," Despite his bleakness, he was gentle. He rebandaged her head with surprisingly nimble fingers. He repaired the broken heel of her boot without being asked. He was a fortress of a man, and for the first time in a long time Agnes felt a strange sense of safety. He saw her, too. He saw the calluses on her hands, the ingrained dirt beneath her nails that spoke more of a life of hard labor than of prayer. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes when a coyote howled too close to the cabin, a fear that was ancient and worldly. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that this woman was no simple nun. She was a survivor just like him. When she was well enough to travel, he hitched his own horse to her repaired wagon frame. "I can't take you all the way to town," he said, his gaze fixed on the distant, dusty settlement. "I don't go into town." He didn't need to explain why. A man like Elias Thorne did not belong among crowds and laws. He was a law unto himself, a creature of the solitude he had chosen, or that had been forced upon him. "Thank you, Elias," she said, her voice filled with an earnestness that seemed to make him uncomfortable. "I am in your debt." He simply gave a curt nod and turned away, melting back into the landscape as if he were a part of it. But he did not disappear completely. In the weeks that followed, a freshly dressed deer would sometimes appear on the orphanage's doorstep at dawn. A pile of perfectly chopped firewood would materialize overnight. Agnes knew it was him, her silent guardian angel, watching from the periphery. This quiet charity did not go unnoticed. Mayor Franklin Blackwood, a man whose smile never reached his cold, calculating eyes, owned nearly everything in Redemption's Gulch. He saw Agnes's orphanage not as a place of hope, but as an unregistered asset on land he coveted for a planned expansion of his saloon and gambling empire. He first approached her with a cloying, false sympathy. "My dear sister Agnes," he began, his voice dripping with insincere piety. "This is noble work, truly, but these children need more. The town council has authorized me to purchase this land from you, to build a proper, state-run facility. You will be well compensated." Agnes stood her ground, her small frame radiating an unshakable resolve. "This is their home, Mayor. It is not for sale. A home is built with love, not with money." Blackwood's mask slipped. His smile tightened. "Everything has a price, sister. You would be wise to remember that." His campaign of intimidation began subtly. Merchants who supplied the orphanage suddenly found their credit cut off. The town doctor became conveniently unavailable for the sick children. But Agnes persisted, her faith in her community unwavering. Infuriated by her defiance, Blackwood decided to destroy not her home, but her reputation. When a small fire, easily extinguished, broke out in the back of the town's land registry office, Blackwood saw his chance. He had his paid sheriff plant a small, empty tin of kerosene, the same kind Agnes used for her lamps, near the scene. The next day, he publicly accused her of arson and attempting to destroy town records, framing it as an act of vengeance for his generous offer. A sham trial was convened. Witnesses, indebted to or terrified of Blackwood, gave perjured testimony. The jury, handpicked by the mayor, delivered their swift, inevitable verdict: guilty. The sentence was death by hanging. The town that had once revered her now looked upon her with fear and suspicion. Her goodness had been twisted into a weapon against her. And so she found herself on the gallows, the town a blur of accusatory faces, her silent protector, Elias, a fading prayer on her lips. The rider drew closer, resolving from a heat haze mirage into a man of flesh and blood. It was Elias Thorne. He didn't charge in, guns blazing. He rode his horse at a slow, funereal pace right up to the base of the gallows, stopping directly in front of Mayor Blackwood. The crowd fell silent, a collective gasp rippling through the air. Elias's eyes, cold and hard as chips of flint, were locked on the mayor. "It's been a long time, Miller," Elias said, his voice carrying with chilling clarity across the square. Mayor Blackwood's face went pale, his composure shattering like cheap glass. He sputtered, I don't know who you're talking about. My name is Blackwood." "Your name is August Miller," Elias continued, his voice relentless, each word a hammer blow. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book, the same one Agnes had seen on his mantelpiece. You were a railroad foreman in the Dakota Territories. You embezzled funds, and when your crimes were about to be exposed, you set a fire to cover your tracks. A fire that killed a man and his wife. Elias's voice cracked for the first time, a fissure revealing the molten grief beneath. My wife. My son. He swung down from his horse, his movements fluid and dangerous. He held up the book. This was my son's journal. On the last page, he wrote about the mean foreman, Mr. Miller, who threatened his father. And there was a witness to your threats, Miller. A young woman who worked as our governess. A woman who saw you sneaking from our house just before the fire started. She fled in terror before she could testify. He turned his gaze from the mayor to the woman on the platform. His voice softened, but it carried an intensity that made every soul in that square hold their breath. A woman named Clara at the sound of her real name, a name she hadn't heard in years. Agnes's composure finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. The habit, the name, the life of a sister. It had all been a disguise, a sanctuary she had built to hide from the man who now stood just feet from her, poised to murder her a second time. Elias looked back at the stunned mayor. I've been hunting you for 10 years, Miller. When I found Clara here, living as a nun, I didn't understand. But now I do. You didn't just follow her here. You sought her out to silence her for good. He tossed the journal at the sheriff's feet. That's my son's testimony. And she, he pointed a trembling finger at Agnes, is my witness. The truth descended on the crowd, stark and undeniable. The whispers turned from condemnation of Agnes to outrage at Blackwood. The sheriff, a weak man but not an entirely evil one, bent down and picked up the journal, his face a mask of dawning horror. Blackwood, cornered and exposed, made a fatal mistake. His hand darted inside his coat for a hidden derringer. But Elias was faster. In a movement too quick to follow, he drew his own pistol, not firing, but slamming the heavy barrel against Blackwood's wrist. The derringer clattered to the dusty ground. It's over, Elias said, his voice low and final. There would be no vengeance, only justice. Deputies, their loyalty to Blackwood dissolving in the face of his monstrous crimes, surged forward and seized him. Elias climbed the steps to the gallows, and with a single swift motion of his knife, he cut the rope from Agnes's, from Clara's neck. She stumbled forward into his arms, the strength finally leaving her limbs. He held her, the stoic, solitary man and the resilient, hidden woman, two broken halves of a forgotten tragedy, made whole again in the center of a town built on lies. The children from the orphanage, seeing she was safe, broke through the crowd and swarmed around her, their small hands clinging to her dress. Elias looked down at the scene, at this woman he had saved and the children who loved her. The hole in his heart, carved out by the fire that took his family, began to fill with a warmth he thought he would never feel again. A new family, a found family, was being born from the ashes of the old. What is a name but a label? And what is a past but a story we tell ourselves? Clara, who was once Agnes, was saved not by a holy miracle, but by the relentless power of human connection, by a secret that refused to stay buried. Elias, a man who lived only for vengeance, found a new reason to live in the act of justice and protection. They remind us that even in the most desolate of landscapes, hope can take root. They teach us that the family we are born into is a matter of chance, but the family we build, the one we fight for, is a matter of choice. When have you seen courage rise from the depths of despair? When has an act of loyalty changed the course of someone's life? The human spirit is not easily extinguished. It endures, it fights, and it finds its light even in the deepest darkness. If the story of survival and redemption resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. And for more stories that celebrate the strength of the human heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel.